you all for being here tonight. We are going to go ahead and get started with our agenda work session, August 23rd, 2018. We're attempting to set the agenda for the September 13th regular council meeting. Jen, if we could have the roll call, please.
Driver,
Here.
Vice Mayor Stoll,
Here.
Councilmember Cagle,
Here.
Councilmember Dolan, here, Councilmember Williams,
Here.
City Manager Moore,
Here.
City Attorney Litchfield.
Here.
Again, thank you all for being here. We do have one potential item of old business. That would be ordinance number 1076, which was tabled on June 14th. This would be, again, potentially second and final reading. This is in regard to amending zoning regulations of the zoning map for the property located at 3623 Fountain Avenue.
I can provide just a little bit of update on that. So I got an email from some members of Lexington Asset. They are still in the process of doing the demolition work, final cleanup. They reached out about Hamilton County Board of Education. I know they're working on that. And then they also inquired about the type of fencing that they were going to put in. At that meeting, they had taken several numbers from surrounding citizens that actually joined that property, and they were supposed to reach out to them and get a consensus on the type of fencing and stuff that they would like to see. I've not been provided any information on that yet, so I think we were under the impression that it would be a couple weeks out before we got that information back.
He's helpful as we are to have all this information for the next council meeting, which would be September 13th.
Yes, sir.
So this is not ready to come off the table. Tonight, at the 6:30 meeting, we're not recommending that taken off the table.
That's correct, because we not received the information that was requested during the hearing that we had for citizen comment.
And I think the other issues that the residents wanted to see is good neighborly diligence on behalf of Lexington Assets to demolish the one building down to the ground and clean that up first before the rezoning takes place. And I think the whole room's pretty well in favor of pushing in that direction. And the gentleman from Lexington Asset finally back the rest and said, okay, I can understand that. He agreed to do that. We should have all this for the September 13th meeting. At that time, we consider taking it off. The council would consider taking it off and taking action on it.
All right. Are there any questions, comments, council? All right, thank you, sir. And just stay there for a while. Under new business, we have a public hearing for an unnumbered ordinance for the rezoning of 1023 South Seminole Drive at 3118 Ringgold Road from C2 General Commercial, O1 Office, and R1 Residential to R3 Apartment.
Yes, Mayor and Council, on August 6th, the planning Mr. Patel petitioned the Planning Commission for approval and changing zoning to build an apartment complex up behind the old Tom's Carpet, or up behind the Tom's Carpet location. It's multiple zones, and he wanted the store to remain C2, but there's some R1 and O1, and we wanted to make that the compatible R3 for those apartment units. RPA staff report noted that the request was compatible with adjacent land uses, and that's simply due to the apartment complex being directly on the other side of Ringo Road to the north. And it was also compatible with the adjacent development form, again, because within close proximity of the village apartments that sits up on the ridge. And they also felt like it would serve, the R3 zone would serve as a buffer between the residential that sits on Eastview and the manufacturing that sits on South Seminole, because there is some manufacturing district right there. So it would create that buffer in between. Also something to note as part of that zoning requirement, because of the high density high-density residential, if it were to be approved, the high-density residential is required to be screened by a type C screening, and that consists of evergreens that are roughly 8 foot on center spaced, or you can do double row shrubbery. That's a maximum of 7 foot on center. So that's the type of screening that would be required to surround that between the residential zones. And hopefully he'll be here at the next meeting to present on his design.
And item D obviously would be, after the public hearing, the opportunity to consider this on first reading. Are there any questions?
We got, I said on that, meeting, we got a lot of people against, like what we also asked, that they maybe do a traffic study, because it's gonna be so much traffic coming out of there. A lot of it brought in a traffic line, that there's just a couple hours during, morning and afternoon that you have problems, so I said, we're gonna do.
And it's my understanding he plans to bring some of that up, some of those
And it's also supposed to be an upscale apartment complex. It's, I think the cheapest one starts at $1,200 a month. One thing to figure out, somebody's going to make that out here in these streets.
The one thing they would have going for them is the location, easy access to downtown Chattanooga.
That's what he wanted to do.
What was the recommendation from the zoning board?
They did not.
They did not?
All right. Any other questions or comments? All right, item C would be a public hearing for the rezoning of 1509 Waterhouse from R1 residential to C2 commercial general.
So again, on August 6th, Danny Coffey petitioned the Eastern Planning Commission to rezone the property located at 1509 Waterhouse from R1 residential to C2 general commercial. This is a vacant lot that's adjacent to their place of business. They want to use it for a commercial parking lot. At one time, there was a residential structure on this lot that was damaged due to fire some years ago and was eventually raised. RPA staff report noted that it was compatible with the adjacent land use to the north, but not necessarily to the south because of the residential that goes south. Also, it was compatible with the development form, again to the north because of the commercial and not so much for the south. They also did note that some of the uses of the C2 district, such as the auto-oriented uses, so your automotive shops, drive-throughs, things of that nature, if it was to get approved C2, that it would be recommended that the city council put stipulations on the zoning of what type of development can go in there, so you could regulate that, and that's what RPA has recommended. And simply because of, and then they also brought in the screening method, or the aspect of adding the screen, which is already required anyway, and that also would be required to have a type C landscape screening, which is again the 10-foot depth landscape with evergreen trees spaced at like a maximum 10 foot.
And they will use this as parking lot.
Yeah, that's what they're wanting to use it for, is parking lot, but it's basically, it was approved for the parking lot now. You may want to consider, limit the use of drive-through moving forward, or at a minimum, make sure that the screening's adequate enough to protect the neighbors to the south.
But I can't remember, was it brought up also about the lighting, light?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, just to make sure that that there's proper light discipline and not light pollution.
Okay, and item D would potentially be the first reading of that same, or an ordinance on that same issue. Are there any other questions or comments in regard to the rezoning cases? Okay, item E would be a resolution in regard to Larry Clark's annual request for the city to participate in the Tennessee River Rescue.
We've done this over the past numerous years. continue that again this year, so Mr. Clark would like to make his annual request for safety officers and the collection of hauling equipment and staff to get the refuse collected for the event. We've always made this request in the past, and they're asking that we do that again. So this will be on for the September 13th meeting.
Very good. Item F is for a temporary special events permit for Ducks Unlimited.
Yeah, my office received an application for a temporary special events permit, so for the consumption of beer on premises for a Ducks Limited Fall Flight Dinner Banquet. It's scheduled for one evening, October 18th, in Camp Jordan Arena. This is not open to the public, this is their private event that they're going to have. So this will be placed before the city council at the next regular business meeting for your consideration for formal approval.
They will be selling beer.
It's my understanding that they will, yes. There'll only be those that are, I think they've got 300.
It's 425 with staff,
I'm sorry?
425 with staff.
Oh, okay, you're up to 400 now. This is their annual banquet.
Okay, any other questions? Item G would be discussion of the crime-free rental regulations.
City Council, Mayor. Did we skip one?
No,
This is.
no, that's last.
Yeah, that's item, I've got it as item I. That's okay. No problem. We have a presentation coming here on the screens.
While Kenny is setting that up, Mayor and Council, this was an item that was requested of me to kind of research what the status is and the capabilities of this body coming up with some sort of crime-free residential rental regulations. And so what I've done over the last really 2.5, 3 weeks, in addition to looking up the literature and the research that I can locate on this, and talking with multiple representatives in Nashville as well as representatives over in Knoxville with the University of Tennessee and the NTAS division. What we've done, I figured it might be beneficial for you all just to see sort of some of the findings that we have that I was able to conclude. I see that it's on the side ones, if this one comes up. What I've done to prepare this is also hopefully helpful for the citizens to recognize. I think it's a great idea to have crime-free properties. I think everybody would agree that that's a possibility they could do it. You've seen it enacted in various states, Illinois, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, Ohio. Those are just a few of the states that have adopted some sort of crime-free rental regulations or crime-free legislation. It has all started from the state level. Each of these states have enacted state statutes specifically addressed to get crime-free legislation moved so that there could be local enforcement at the local level for enforcement mechanisms, namely ordinances prepared. Unfortunately, the state of Tennessee has not adopted any crime-free residential inspection program. Talking with various representatives up in Nashville, as well as the MTAS representatives, they have all said the same thing. The apartment association has a very strong lobby. They have strong property rights down here in the South, and that their position is that a property owner that is renting his property, that's his business, and they're able to do it, but for some reason they treat it different than a business operation that you would see otherwise in the city of Peachtree or in other local communities, which have regulations such as business permits, licensing that they're required to do. Unfortunately, in the state of Tennessee, landlords are not required to go through any of those registration requirements. You've got two areas that I'll talk about to this body that do allow for some version of either registration or, if not registration, inspection program. One is under Title 13, Section 21-301, which is identified as the Residential Rental Inspection Act. Under Section 301, you've got the possibility that this body could adopt what they would consider to be a residential rental district. Unfortunately, to get there, you have to notify the property owners, let them know that certain properties are being considered for a district. There has to be a public hearing. There's got to be certain findings. The findings, in order to create a district, is that this body would have to find that there is a need to protect the public health, safety, and welfare of the occupants within that district. You must find that the dwelling units within that district are deteriorated or in the process of deteriorating. You can't just pick an area and say, this is residential rental that we have seen. We're going to designate this a district so that we can start inspecting. You have to go through a program that actually determines that they are deteriorated or that they are in the process of being deteriorated. And you also have to find a need, or have a finding that they are in need of the inspection to prevent deterioration or further deterioration.
It sounds a lot like what we went through to form the housing authority,
That's fair. I mean, yes, I think we've seen that. And
which we erased.
unfortunately, for a district under this section, it is pretty rigorous. The state law is clear. I mean, it specifically states it must be limited in size and it must be focused only on the deteriorated properties. You've got in here under the same inspection regulation that you can, if a district was formed, let's just assume for purposes of discussion that you could form one. What are the powers that the body, this governing body would have? And unfortunately, it's fairly limited. There would be an inspection program. That inspection program would be limited to determining if the property passes all codes. It is not anywhere in the statute, and I have talked to multiple people up in MTAS saying, is crime one of the aspects that can be determined or evaluated for purposes of forming this district? And the answer unfortunately came back as no. It's housing code, building code, plumbing, electrical. Those are the things that came back. You can do an inspection for those type of items. If you do an inspection and you find that that property passes and has no violations, that property is exempt for 4 years from inspection. The only way that you would revoke that, exemption would be if there was a finding of a violation of some sort of a housing code. And I'll bring this up here, right here. You've got housing code, building code, plumbing, electrical code, and the fire and health code. That is directly quoted from the statute. And so I call up to Knoxville and ask him, I said, with the health code, could we possibly tie that into any sort of a crime-related manner? The answer I got was no, it is not. One of the big pushes against crime-free legislation has been members of the ACLU that find that victims are often targeted for eviction because of the number of police calls. I think if it were legal, you could pull out that and say, it's not the number of the police calls, it's the type of the offense that came about. And when I talked to the representatives in Nashville, the answer was, well, if you look at these state statutes, in other states, they have a specific crime-free legislation that allows it. Unfortunately, Tennessee has not adopted that. Only 2 cities in the state of Tennessee have adopted a district, and that's Nashville and Oak Ridge. You've got also here that this statute, the inspection one, is subject to what they call your old, the Uniform Residential Landlord Tenant Act. I told you at the beginning, there's really only 2 statutes that address municipal authority as it relates to residential rental properties. One is the one I just told you about, which would require you to form a district before you could invoke the inspection. Even if you did that, you can't charge a fee, you can't charge an inspection fee, you can't charge a registration fee. So the question is how to finance it. It would be something that would have to come up. This body would have to find the funds to basically fund an operation for an inspection program if it came about. The other statute is, as I told you, the Uniform Residential Landlord Tenant Act. That's under Title 66. There's one provision that allows, or that at least addresses, what, if any, municipal authority has in connection with this statute, and that's found under Section 107 of Title 66, Chapter 28. Unfortunately, again, this body is exempted out, or this city, including all the cities in Hamilton County, and in fact all the cities in the state of Tennessee except for Nashville are exempted out of this under the UROLTA, as they call it, under Title 66, Chapter 28. It is a requirement that landlords are required to furnish certain information to the city. Their address, their actual address and telephone number, where they can be contacted, and the street address and the unit numbers of the residential units. You look at the statute, and when I first got there, I actually called back up to Knoxville and I said, guys, I think you're wrong. I think the city of East Ridge can, in fact, at least implement a registration program. Then I kept looking and found at the end of it, on the next page, unfortunately, in Section C of this, it specifically says, as it relates to the fact that under UROLTA you could require registration, you could even charge a $10 annual fee for it. But unfortunately, it's only that statute specifically states is only applicable to any county having a metropolitan form of government and a population in excess of 500,000 people. Well, Hamilton County only has 350,000, but that alone, we don't have a metropolitan form of government. Nashville is your only city in the state of Tennessee. So unfortunately, we cannot require them to register. For those that have been attending the housing or the AHO meetings or hearings that we've had over the last 3 or 4 months, there are several times where we've had to postpone hearings because we can't locate the landlord. Unfortunately, what we do is we continue those. We try to send out certified and U.S. mail. We have started with the police department to send out notices through services from the police department. Some of these landlords, unfortunately, are just absent. They don't reside here in the city. Under the current mechanisms right now, this Tennessee state legislature has not given this body much, if any, authority to get to act. So we started brainstorming with what are the options, rather than just simply just say we're going to give up. One of the thoughts was, and I talked to people in Knoxville, was what are the efforts? There came back, it needs to be from a local level, trying to bring a movement up in Nashville during the legislation to get a change. Expand it, at the very least, have it removed from the Uniform Residential Landlord Tenant Act, that the requirement for registration of landlords not be limited solely to Davidson County, or excuse me, to Nashville, not just Davidson, but Nashville. If we can get a grassroots efforts, we might get some movement up in Nashville that they remove that stipulation, that the requirement for registration of a landlord only applies to Nashville. You might get that removed at that point. The other one is, and I think I've heard some good communication throughout the last couple of weeks, is you encourage the landlords. You make it clear to them, this body supports landlords that otherwise put in a lease, a crime-free lease addendum into their leases. We've heard requests for that. I think it's good to encourage them to have that. As far as the mechanism to enforce it, this body doesn't have it. I got to thinking, I tried to find another alternative to, if we can't legislate that into the city ordinance, could we somehow put it as a stipulation for condition on the rezoning? And unfortunately, there's no authority to put a crime-free, at least addendum requirement as a condition for rezoning. When rezoning, you're limited to regulations upon land use, what type of activity will occur there, business, office, residential. You're limited to, if you're going to change an apartment, you could limit it to the number of units. Those are land use regulations. You could have, additional requirements for fire safety, additional exits. What you don't have authority is to put in a crime-free lease addendum as a stipulation for condition of rezoning. That was sort of met with disappointment when I heard that from Knoxville. Got also the problem that this is a Dillon's Law state, which is that municipalities can only act through the authority granted to them expressly from statutes. If it's not a statute, you can't act. You don't have the authority, which is contrary to several states. But unfortunately, Tennessee is a Dillon's Law state that follows it. So I tried to think of some options here that this city, if this body doesn't have the ability to do, that this body could at least encourage its local legislature like in Nashville, that the citizens can try to do, is to push for change in legislation. Coming up here in January, this might be an item that we have a lobbyist that works for us. It might be that we want to suggest to her, this is what we'd like to see. An effort to try to change it at the state level so that crime-free legislation will be authorized at the state level, which would then allow this body to come forward. Because there are a lot of crime-free legislative ordinances. Like I said, on the states I showed you earlier, Illinois is a big state. They're doing it. Ohio is another one. Arizona is a big one. It has a big crime-free legislative movement. They've got programs initiated there, and I think they're seeing improvement from residential property that is being rented out. They're seeing less crime by the enactment of some of this crime-free legislation. So I wish I had better news to tell you regarding this, but unfortunately, Tennessee has been pretty clear. Any authority that you have is either exempted out because of a population statute or there's just no authority for it. Any questions? It did not come up there. Okay, it came out on the sides. I've got a copy of the PowerPoint we can get to. If you'd like to print that out and get a copy for you. Any questions?
Well, I'm understanding this then. The city has no control over telling these people that they have to do it. The only thing we can do is to ask them, not request them, but to voluntarily put it in their lease agreements. And when they come to have problems with that thing, then they can bring it to our courts, and then we can handle the situation in our courts.
I mean, it's a court decision. I mean, let me say it this way: there's an authority mechanism that has not been spoken here, and I apologize. You still hold the keys to rezoning. I mean, you can rezone or you can't. So you've got that. But at the extent of requiring a property owner or a landlord, you just can't put the stipulation of condition that they have it. So the answer to the question is yes, Councilman, is that you can't. It is a matter between the landlord and tenant. The landlord can have it. Now, landlord still has to comply with the Uniform Residential Landlord-Tenant Act, and there are certain provisions that override stipulations in a contract for a lease agreement. But you can't just kick a tenant out. Now, you can institute eviction process, but you can't immediately just throw their stuff out on the side of the road and say you're out because some crime happened here. You still have to give them an opportunity for hearing, even if you've got the addendum. But it is a mechanism that if we can encourage it strongly from landlords, that it might improve properties. But unfortunately, you can't put it as a requirement as part of the zoning.
Can I ask?
You can ask. Yeah, you ask. I think it's worth asking. And hopefully you've got landlords. The other is educate the landlords. There are a lot of community neighborhood associations around here. When landlords are discovered in the neighborhood, find them, educate them, let them know that this city demands top-notch overwatch of their property, and that there's landlords that are expected to abide by this. You've got it at the minimum when you know tenants are coming to look. hopefully you can find those tenants and explain to them, look, this is a landlord that doesn't take care of the property. They may promise you everything, but you're gonna be sorely disappointed, so they maybe not rent there. So until you get landlords that are actually going to comply with the standards of the city, then that would help. Council Mayor, thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Item H, discussion of the dog park.
We discussed the animal control facility and dog park several meetings ago. I've had conversations with Mark Mimtoff, our attorney, representing the IDB and the city of East Ridge in regard to Ward region. I'm still waiting a response from the Tennessee Department of Revenue on this. However, some of you have asked whether or not we can move forward with the dog park. The answer is yes, we can. Dog park is an eligible project for funding under the Border Region Retail Tourism Development Redevelopment District Act. So at this time, I would ask the council, do you want to proceed with the dog park? And that would be the acquisition of the land, construction of the park, some costs with regard to clearing the land and installation of the fencing. If that is the case, I would ask you, as council, to give me direction on that. So that's an item for the agenda, 13th. Whatever the council decides, whether you want to wait till we get word back on the animal control facility, or you want to proceed with the creation of the dog park. This would be on lands that would be immediately north of the Ridgewood Shopping Center area.
This land acquisition, is it gonna be big enough for, just for the dog park, or are you gonna plan that, maybe we get permission?
If we get permission to put the animal control facility, probably looking at 3,000, we said about 3,035 max square foot facility, that could be put right in the corner.
The acquisition of the land?
Yes.
Are we gonna buy enough land for the dog park or both?
Both.
Both. Okay.
We would need probably 1/4 of an acre for the building. The land that we're looking at requires 3.28 acres.
Any questions, comments? Final item listed on our work session agenda is an appointment to the Industrial Development Board from Ms. Helen. So that will be upcoming. I don't know if you had someone in mind or are still working on it. Either way.
If anybody's interested, email me.
Do you have anything else? Okay, Mr. Williams.
Be not so.
Mr. Schuler. Mr. Cagle.
Yes, sir. First off, just an annual thing, the 9/11 luncheon. It's snooping up on us here, and I haven't put in a request yet to be able to use the gymnasium over there for the 9/11 luncheon. And we have put a request in to Chief Williams and Chief Reed, be getting the names of the men that y'all want to be honored. Submitted mine today. I submitted my name today. Okay.
I don't know yet.
Okay. But we need for, so we get the plaques made up. Okay. And the other thing is, I have noticed here at East Ridge, we've got 2 containment ponds that do not have fences around them. And one of them I've never seen water in. It's all grown up with trees, bushes, and stuff. And the other one stays full of water. So I was wondering what the rules and regulations, time frame was in having fences put around them, or are there any rules and regulations on fences? Because I've noticed at Walmart, the 2 around their containment ponds.
Yeah, and I believe we discussed this briefly some time ago. The Walmart did one in the front simply because it was right off the new sidewalk that they had built, that pedestrian access that went along Ringo Road. Looking at stormwater regulations, the codes that we have currently on the books, there's not a requirement. That was something that they did on their own home, and it might have been simply because of their insurance company. Their insurance company might have said, you know, you're gonna have this, there's a chance that the water does stay in it, that it doesn't seep back into the system, so on and so forth. There's not a whole lot of difference if you look at it between a stormwater detention pond and the pond we have in Camp Jordan. So if we create a regulation to do all stormwater detention ponds, then we're gonna have to also potentially use the same regulation to fit in Camp Jordan pond. So that's something that we can look at. We've looked at regulations through Hamilton County and different things, but we've not seen anything specific that said that you had to do it based on a certain depth. Similar to you would like a swimming pool code. Swimming pool code dictates that, states that, but as for detention, because they're generally, a lot of them are dry detention, they fill up and they go down. That one down there, just simply, it's got a max level that it can get to. But I'll be happy to look into it further, and if I can find anything else, I'll let you know.
Okay. Do you have anything else, Mr. Fields?
No, have the council all agree with the use of the,
Yes, if we can, let's add it to tonight's regular agenda. And we'll go ahead and vote on that. Make it official. So if we add it in, it will be item E under new business. Okay. That's all that we have for this meeting. We will adjourn the work session, the agenda work session, and we'll take about 2 or 3 minutes just to stop the tapes and restart for our regular council meeting here, just again, a couple of minutes.